Hello, everyone, and welcome to Building the College List. We are hopeful that today's webinar will help with juniors and their parents as they start to think about their college list and where they're going to apply and how to manage this whole list building activity, which is vitally important. And I'm hoping that you will see that as we move on. Today's agenda is, first I'd like to introduce our counseling staff. I'm going to go down from where I can see them on the screen. I'd like to have them introduce themselves. We'll start with Ms. Tenza.
Hi there, good morning. Thanks for joining us. My name is Andrea Tenza. This is my second year here at Bishop Guertin, and I work primarily with the freshmen and our continuing ed students.
Hi, I'm Dylan Mullen, the Associate Director of Counseling. I've been here for 10 years, and I have students from grades 9 to 12, typically from like M or N through the end of the alphabet.
Mrs. Leonard.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Leonard. I have the middle of the alphabet, and I've been here for about 2 years. So thanks for joining us today.
Ms. Futrell.
I'm Miss Futrell, and I have the beginning of the alphabet, so from A through about G and or F, and I have been here for about 8 years. So welcome.
So for those of you who I haven't met, my name is Brenda Posnanski, and I have the privilege of working with this fine group of counselors in the counseling office as the director, and I have been here about 15 years, and this whole process has changed very much since 5 years ago, let alone 15 years ago, and we're hopeful that we will get some of those points across to you. What we're going to talk about today is why is building a list so important? And most of us would say that it is probably the most important part of this whole process. When we have a good list, it really does impact so much. So there's some things to consider when building that list, finding your fit. So we'll talk about that. What do you want from your college experience? Very important as students start to consider colleges that might be a perfect fit for them. How to do that, what you need to know, how to go about that investigation. Why is college admission so challenging in this day and age? We also have next steps and important information. And here are our names and information to contact us. Always feel free to do that. Miss Lee Alcorn is not on the webinar today, but she's our administrative assistant, and she can always find us if we're not in our offices or we're working with a student. She can take messages and be very helpful. She also interfaces with the students a lot through this process. So she's a person for the students to really get to know. So building a list. Why is it so important? Mrs. Leonard.
So I'd like to start out by kind of saying where you should start in this whole process. So the first thing that I suggest to families is to have a discussion, because it's important when building the list to figure out what the student is looking for. And I'll go into further detail as to what kind of questions to ask in the next slide. But the second thing after you've asked these questions that I will talk about in the next slide is you would use a college search engine such as College Board or SCORE, and you can narrow by certain criteria that the student is looking for, such as like size, location. But again, I'll go through those questions in the next slide. The third thing I would say is to start with a larger number and then to explore them and maybe visit campuses, but then start to kind of narrow down the list to a manageable number of schools to apply to, which usually is around like 8 to 12 schools. Too few isn't a good thing, and too many isn't a good thing either, because that can become overwhelming for the student. It's important to pay attention to the acceptance rates, balancing your schools, like not too many that are highly competitive, and having a few that are in the middle, like maybe in the 50 to 75% acceptance rate, and then having some that are in like the 75+ acceptance rates. So you can search by selectivity. It's important to know this when you are on College Board or SCORE. There should be a criterion you can check off to pick selective or less selective schools. So that can kind of help when you're starting this search. So you can do the next slide where I'll go into more detail, the questions that you can start with as a family. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I basically already said size of school. That's a really important one. Like, do you thrive in large crowds or large class sizes, or do you feel like you want a more intimate setting with like a lower teacher-student ratio? Those are things to really consider, and that can really help you narrow your list. Do you like the bustle of a city, or do you prefer the peace of the country, or do you want something kind of in between, like not in the city, but not fully remote either? You want maybe something in between that's just outside a city where you can get into the city if you want, but you still have a little bit of that peace that you might be looking for and not as busy as living in Boston or New York City. Do you want to be close to home or far away? If you're thinking far away, it's important to consider the cost of flights. Like, will you be coming home every holiday, every summer? Like, that can really add up, especially if you're going very far away. So those are things to be mindful of, because you're already paying or will be paying tuition for school, and adding those additional fees on top of that can be something to factor in. Do you want to be a resident on campus or commute? Or maybe you're someone that maybe wants to start out as a commuter and then maybe live on campus the next year. So these are things to kind of think about. And the financial piece, it's a huge part of it with how expensive college is becoming these days. And a school's website will list the tuition and financial aid information, and you can always make an appointment with their financial aid office too, if you feel like you're confused in the process. Like, they're a resource for you. So we always suggest to use that. And ask yourself, what major am I wanting? Do I want a school where there are vast internship opportunities or great career placement assistance? So these are things to kind of ask when you go on a tour, or you can email admissions or look on the website to find the answers to these questions. Do you want a diverse campus, or do you want a certain sport or a club? Like, these are things to, again, look at when you're going to visit these schools and starting to search for them. And then another important piece I kind of mentioned before, like, do you fit the admissions requirements? Often on their website, schools will have, under the admissions, they might have like their current freshman class, like what GPA range they accepted or what SAT score range they had. So looking at that, or you can even make an appointment with your counselor to look into that as well. And just at the end of the day, you want to just ask yourself, what do you like about the school academically, personally, socially? And I think creating a spreadsheet of what you're looking for could be important, and then listing each school that you are interested in and kind of marking off which criteria they meet. That can kind of help you see which schools meet the most criteria that you're seeking, and that can kind of really help you narrow it down. And at the end of the day, there's probably going to be more than one school that's a good fit for you. So don't feel like you have to lock in, like, I have to find my perfect school for me, because chances are there's going to be more than one that would be a good fit for you. And I think that's pretty much it from my slides. I think Mr. Mullen is up next. Thank you.
Thanks. So just to kind of piggyback off what Mrs. Leonard said, so you have to really kind of think big picture when you're looking at the college process and building a list. So when you want to think about a certain major, is your major one that a lot of schools have, or is it going to be really specific to, you know, nursing schools or engineering or STEM focused things? So when you're building lists and using either College Board, SCORE, conversations with your parents and counselors, you want to really take that into consideration when you start to build what would be a big list, and then start to whittle it down to whatever is a list that you feel comfortable applying to. You know, when you think about living there, you're going to have to spend 9 months a year in the college setting. So do you want a single room? Do you want doubles? Do you want to have triples? Do you want to have, you know, a different living experience than what you're typically used to? Do you want to have to share bathrooms? So these are all things that when you're building lists or going on tours, you want to take into consideration so that you have all the information in front of you when you make an informed decision on ultimately where you want to go to school. You know, does the college offer study abroad or internships, or do they allow students to have double majors, minors, things like that? Those are all things you can ask or research on your own when you're going through building a list. Are you interested in pursuing college athletics? So, you know, when you're thinking about creating a list, you want to make sure that if it's something you are interested in, that the school has, first off, the sport you're interested in. And then once you visit the school, you have to ask yourself, if I end up not playing, if I get hurt, if I get cut, could I see myself staying at this school for the duration of my college time? Because that's a lot of things that students don't factor in. They just see well, I want to play a sport, but they don't have my major, or I really hate the school, aside from the fact that, you know, they have my sport, but it's not always the long-term thought they have to think about. How much debt will you have to take on? You know, there's been a lot of discussion recently with the college landscape becoming more and more expensive. So when doing your research, you want to look at, you know, what's the overall cost of the school? What's the typical merit package that they have or what they provide to students? And then how much will that leave me for financial aid? You know, you want to make sure you're thinking about what's best for me long-term when I'm looking at how much will I come out of college with on the debt side? And do I end up having to pursue another degree? If so, how much more debt can I expect to take on? So what will my total amount be that I owe when I want to get my degree or two? You know, when I ultimately want to pursue a career. And then lastly, other services for the students for academics, emotional, financial, social support. So there's going to be student assistance programs within most, if not all, of the colleges. It's just a matter of how you would access them and what services they can provide for particular students and what are, you know, the breakdowns of that. So when you're doing your research, you can search on the student assistance programs or student services team on the particular college websites, and they'll be able to walk you through or describe what they can offer in terms of supports for you. And those are things that are probably becoming a little bit more prevalent in today's society. So you want to make sure you look at those and make sure that if you're looking for those supports, they have all those things for you. Because again, those are things that everyone has to take into consideration when making what would be a pretty large commitment on your end for, you know, 4+ years of college. So just make sure you're aware of everything that has to be kind of thought of when building a list. So I'm going to pass my piece off to Mrs. Tenza at this point.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to take a little time to talk about how to explore colleges. And the first thing that we really want to encourage our students to do is to come meet with us, to, you know, arrange a meeting. It's never too early to start the conversations about college. And in fact, right around course selection time, we have some of these conversations with our students because they're looking at which classes they might want to take and what kind of careers they might want to pursue. So this is a really great way to get that conversation going with even the freshmen who may not be, you know, they may not know exactly what they want to do, but it's a great time to get the conversation started. So it's never too early. Our college websites are great resources. You can absolutely, you know, go directly to the individual college website for great information and virtual tours. But we also use tools called SCORE and College Board, and these are really great ways for the student to gather information on the colleges that they might be interested in. So we, again, have some programming where we meet with the students and introduce them to these tools. They really take advantage of them, and it's really helpful when looking at different colleges. College fairs are another great resource, and our students were very fortunate to be able to meet over 100 representatives on Wednesday. They had a very unique opportunity where the representatives came to us at Bishop Guertin. So they were able to talk to different representatives and ask really important questions and, again, gather information from representatives of colleges that they might be interested, or maybe they were talking to reps from colleges that they weren't necessarily interested in, but getting that information was valuable either way. visit colleges. We can't stress this enough too, especially in the initial stages of this process. You don't have to hop on a plane and go to California to look at colleges. You can stay very local. Right here in Nashua, we have Riviera you could visit. If you have a day over April vacation, you can hop in the car and go to Boston and just tour some of those great campuses that are very local. We live in a great region of the country where so many, academic universities and colleges are accessible to us. So definitely take some time to visit those colleges, and take advantage of those long weekends and school vacations. And then talk with friends who are going to college and get that information, get the firsthand information from your friends, and you can kind of pick their brains about what they were looking for and what they like and what they dislike about their different experiences. A couple things not to do. Do not listen to people who are not experts. Mrs. Poznansky always says, just because you went to college doesn't make you an expert on it. And like we've said, the college application process right now is ever evolving, and it will continue to change. It does not look the same as it did 5, 10, 15 years ago. There are many more applicants, which means that, students are getting all sorts of different decisions, hearing from different colleges about all sorts of crazy circumstances that we're seeing. So don't assume something is real that you read on social media. Of course, we know that that's not the case. Social media is not reality. So a lot of our students are, reading statistics or seeing certain stories about colleges that are not necessarily true. So they should definitely be speaking to one of us in the counseling department if they're having questions. And don't jump into something, quickly. This is a marathon, not a sprint. So again, it's very important that they gather information, and that is what we are here for. So we do not want them to miss out on having an appointment with us, or, just stopping by during lunch. If we're available, we want to talk to them, and we want to kind of clear up any questions or myths that they might be hearing out there. There's just so much information and, stress that can kind of overwhelm our students. So we want them, and parents too, we want everyone to just feel comfortable with this process. So please use us as your most valuable resource. I think I'm passing it over to Mrs. Futrell. Or back to Mrs. Poznansky, actually. Sorry about that.
So why is college admission so challenging? This has changed, as I mentioned when we opened the session, that it is very different, and this is kind of just reiterated, it's very different than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever. We also have a very educated society. A lot of people have been going to college over the last 50 years. And so everybody feels like they know information. A lot of people have been sending their children to colleges, so they know a lot of information. But I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I have to tell you that I have to be a student of this profession, because it is really hard to keep up with all the changes that have happened over the years. And what is happening right now in college admissions has really changed the landscape of this process tremendously. So all of the counselors here at BG are trying our best to keep abreast of the changes, what colleges are sharing with us. I had a very robust discussion with a VP of enrollment at a very popular school for our students at the college fair on Wednesday about what is happening out there. It's even hard for the admissions people in the colleges to predict what's going to happen. So some of the reasons for that is that the number of applications has grown exponentially over the last few years, especially since COVID, when colleges took the SAT requirement off, or the ACT requirement off, or made it test optional or test blind, it gave students the idea that automatically they would do differently, and so they would just look at certain things, and that would give them more open doors. And it actually worked just the opposite. The applications rose so dramatically that regardless of SAT testing or not, it was impossible for schools to read all of the applications, and this is still going. So this year, just from the class of 2024, here are some statistics of colleges and their numbers. Now, obviously, these are pretty popular colleges, but it's still filtering down to the other colleges that might not be quite as competitive or as elite. But the University of Southern California, 82,000 applications for 7,600 spaces. Boston College, from an applicant pool of 35,000 plus, they're entering class 2028, offered admission to 5,200. So as you can see, these statistics are incredible. And they have a wait list of 4,000 students. The chances of 4,000 students ever getting in is probably non-existent. They may go to their wait list and take 50. So what happens typically in a situation like that is that colleges will weight their wait list once they feel they might move it. But still, they're only accepting 15% of their class. So this is all math, right? Holy Cross, it's 16%. BU class of 2028, and it's been another big year for them. They had 79,000 applications, but they increased their freshman class by 155 students, and that's great, except they're only looking for 3,300 out of that 79,000. So again, the numbers are just, they're just hard to believe. They're mind-boggling. Bentley University, which I worked at Bentley University, and we would be excited if we got to 4,000 applications. But we also didn't have 1,000 seats. We only had 800 seats in those days, but still it was hard. It was hard to pick a class. And look at it now. I mean, 11,000 applications for 1,000. Northeastern had 98,000 applications. But if you look at what they said, our decisions reflect the entire applicant pool and our enrollment goals, not the individual applicant's accomplishment, which is an alarming comment to have made. But this is how colleges that get that size of an applicant pool have to operate. So it isn't personal. It isn't about the student. It's about numbers. And so this is a hard piece of all of this, especially when a student has been working really hard throughout high school. They've challenged themselves in classes. They've belonged to clubs and organizations. They've been an athlete. They've done community service. They've worked really, really hard. They stayed in on weekends when other friends were going out and all of that. It's hard to hear that this is about numbers and not about that. But again, it depends on the list in which you build. Maybe some of these classes shouldn't be on a student list because of these numbers and factors. Duke University, 48,000 applicants, and they had fewer than half of those applicants make it through the first two readers. So many of these colleges will have a first round, a second round, third and fourth round of reading that happens. They're usually culling out the list of people who will go to the third and fourth round in the first and second reads. 95% of their total applicants will be denied because only a half of them made it through the first two readings. So these are astounding statistics. The other one that I did not put in here, but is definitely part of it, is how many colleges are either need blind or need aware. And those are very, very, very interesting topics to cover. So I'm going to talk about that quickly because you need to have a conversation with your child, as Mrs. Leonard was saying, about finances. Because colleges are deciding on who they are accepting based on who can pay. So if you're not in need of financial aid, the door is open in a different way than for students who need it, especially at the private colleges. The state colleges, not really, because they have a smaller pot of money, and what they do is they distribute it based on how many people they can offer admission to and what they're, and that does not mean you'll get full need met, but it does meet, they will meet as much of it as they can. With private schools, it's their money, and so they can do whatever they want. So many of the private schools are need aware. What that means is that they are looking at your ability to pay in the admissions decision. This is very new over the last 10 years. This was not necessarily apparent 10 years prior, although some colleges did do it, they just didn't talk about it. But now colleges are saying whether or not they're need blind or need, and not all of them do, but many of them. And so on their front page of their website in the admissions section should be the net price calculator. The net price calculator is a way that you can decide as you put your financials into that calculator, whether or not that's an appropriate school. And keep in mind that private schools, many of them are need aware, meaning they are going to take into account whether or not you as a family can pay for your students' admission or tuition, sorry. Need blind means that it doesn't matter if you can pay or not. Colleges are going to accept your student on the merits of the student and not the fact that you can pay, you might not pay. So that's a term that you really want to hone in on when you're looking to build this list, because that will be a factor for some of the schools. Now, some schools aren't going to say whether they are or they are not. You can always ask that question when you're on a tour, or as I think Mrs. Leonard said, make an appointment with the financial aid office in front. They're just like making an appointment with an admissions office that you can talk about the finances. But if you look at the staggering numbers, that's what's causing a lot of this glut in the process, which is not allowing students to get in to many colleges, because students are applying to 15, 20 colleges. They can only go to one, but they still take up space in the admissions process. So if you look at this statistic, the number of applications for next fall, which is the fall of 2024, increased by 6%. And this was because from the common application. So increase of 6% over the same time last year, which was really high. So the total number of applications from March 1st rose 7% from 7 million to 75 million. So, you know, it's just an incredible glut in the system. So when you think of a funnel, there's only so many people that can funnel down to where we want them to receive a positive admissions decision. So what drives this is the elite college. The elite colleges drive it. They're making decisions that are so incredibly stark, in other words, accepting 10% or less, that it affects the rest of how colleges are going to practice their admissions policies. So it's a ripple effect. So the answer to this is students need to build a better list. And that's why it's important to have conversations with, you know, their school counselor, for you as a family to really sit down and talk about financially where you fit in all of this. I mean, there was a release last week that there are 3 colleges in the Boston area that will be over $90,000 a year for next year. And that's pretty staggering. That's pretty astounding. We're reaching, you know, $100,000 for college a year. We're reaching that. That will be in play in the next 5 years. Potentially before your son or daughter graduates. So it's really important to build a list that makes sense. If your son or daughter is interested in engineering or nursing, they have to cast a broader net. If your son or daughter is interested in education or social work, then they're going to have to go on to school for graduate school after undergraduate. So what does that mean for that student? So those kinds of discussions are important to have. And that will help if you start the process by looking at it from the perspective of you need to build a very balanced list as I think next is.
So the next steps, as you see listed, there are a number of college fairs that are coming up. It's important that, as Ms. Tenza said, taking advantage of going to the college fairs is a wonderful thing because it gives you the opportunity to meet some of the admissions staff and talk to them and ask questions. You can sometimes find some of the schools that will be at these college fairs, and make a list of the ones that you would like to see, but it's also good to see some schools that maybe you aren't familiar with. So we have the ones coming up listed on this this sheet. The bigger ones tend to have many more schools. They're at the convention centers. The other two that are at the schools at Merrimack College in Assumption, if you go to those, you would actually be able to visit a school or see the campus. So those are nice little perks if you get to go to those. But definitely take advantage of going to the college fairs, talking to the representatives. One of the things that you can do when you're there is also fill out cards. And when you fill out those cards, it's for some schools considered demonstrated interest. So the more that you make those connections, so if it's talking to the admissions rep, filling out a card, visiting the campus, sending them an email, that can help when they're going through that process and making a decision on a student. It shows that you are really interested in that school. So it's always good to make those connections with the representatives any way you can. And the college fair is a great first step to do so. I've also encouraged students to ask the questions if it's about course selection or what they need for requirements. This is a great place to do it. If I'm going into nursing, what are some of the requirements you would want for mathematics or science? Same thing for engineering. So those are good questions to ask as you're going through the college fair and talking to different admissions reps. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. That's why they're there. They're there to answer those questions for you. And when we talk to them, they always say they're not in the process of denying students. They want to admit kids, but they can only admit as many spots as they have at the school. So use that time wisely when you go to the college fairs. Research the different schools that you think you'd be interested in and what their what they look for selectivity. So, SAT scores, GPA, and find those schools that would be right fits when you go to the college fair, and then make a plan to visit the schools once you're done going to the fair and, who you'd like to see. And then you can plan those visits during time that you have time off. So April vacation, during the summer, and in the fall. If you go in during the summer, the one thing I would suggest is trying to get to an open house when there's students on campus, because it's a much different experience going to visit a college when there's students that are there as opposed to when there's students that are not. So the final tips and takeaways from our program today, from the webinar, it's really important that you meet with your school counselor to talk to us about building this list and asking questions that you may have. You can check out the Instagram page, which is listed there. And you can also check out your counseling class page of 2025, which is on MyBG under your classes. So if you look at the top of your MyBG page, it's the counseling class page of 2025. That also has a bunch of information for you. You want to visit, like I said, colleges over April break and in the fall and the summer. Talk to the college admissions offices. They will give you the right information, the same as the staff here. Talking to friends and family and your aunts and uncles. It's been a while since they've been in college, that whole college process, and times have changed. So it's really important to get the up-to-date right information. Looking on websites, and searching and finding what you can find on Google may not be up to date. So those resources may not be the most accurate place. Definitely college admissions is the best place to start, and talking to your college, your counselor at BG is a great place to go. So I highly recommend using those two resources. And it gives you that connection with the admissions rep if you contact a college admissions rep. Go to open houses that colleges offer. Stay open-minded because there are so many colleges out there, and a college that you think may not be the college that's right for you may be the perfect college because there are so many out there. Talk early on with your family about what your expectations are, and that's about everything. Where you want to go, how far is too far away, what can you afford? Because those are all important things. And with the price of college right now, if it's out of reach financially, then that's a good thing to know before you go into the process and start applying to schools that are close to that $100,000 mark per year. Meet once a week. Try not to talk about this process on a daily basis because it will become overwhelming, but set aside a time to meet and talk about, where are you at? What's the next step? And that's a good time to, just spend a little bit of time, maybe on a Sunday afternoon, and talk about, let's plan a visit this week, or, there's a long weekend. Is there an open house? That's a good time to set some time and plan what the next week will look like and where things are at. And again, you can contact the counselors and we can work with you and talk about some things you can be doing during that process. It's a student's journey. So make sure if you have questions as a student, you ask and be true to yourself. This is your journey. You don't have to talk about this process with anyone else or listen to what anyone else is doing, because this is where you're going to be and what's going to be best for you. And as we say, not every school is perfect, but there is and are many perfect schools out there, and there's one that's perfect for each and every one of you. So when you get to this process, and we're doing it now, enjoy it, ask questions, and reach out. Thank you very much for coming and enjoying and watching our webinar.
Thank you everyone for enjoying and listening to this webinar, and hopefully if you have any further questions, you will reach out to us. We are always here to help. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
This says recording.